Mellow greetings, everybody. My name is James. I am from the internet, and today we are going to talk about tips. Yeah, tips. You know, gratuities. The cash you leave to show that you enjoyed your service. All safe and secure in the knowledge that the additional tip that you're giving somebody is going to make up for the fact that they make well below the minimum wage. Now, in my own naivete as a younger person, I just assumed that everybody had worked in a job where you got paid by tip. At least once in their life, 16 years old or, while you're in college. I assumed that literally everybody at some point had waited tables or, was a valet parker or carried luggage or bartended. I just assumed that was everybody. Turns out, the older I got, the more I found out that is not the case. So, for those of you out there who are not aware, the current federal minimum wage is less than $8 an hour. Not a very healthy amount of money, and you're most assuredly not going to be paying rent on an apartment for you and your child on minimum wage as it is. The sub-minimum wage standard that you can pay to people who also get tipped is $2.13 an hour, which is woefully inadequate even compared to the sub $8 minimum wage that we currently have. So I was kind of surprised to find out that just before everybody went home for the holidays, the Labor Department snuck through a little change to how tipped employees get paid, and it's horrendous, and it's basically going to ensure that people who make very little money are now going to make even less money. Why? Because that's what happens when wealthy industries lobby people in Congress and plutocrats are formed through the Vulcan mind meld of capitalists meeting government agencies. So, for those of you who missed it, this shit happened. Labor Department changes rules on tipping in a move that could cost workers $700 million a year. The federal government is changing the rules on how tipped workers are paid in a move that worker advocates say will take $700 million annually from the pockets of servers, bartenders, bellhops, and other service workers. The Labor Department finalized a rule late on Tuesday allowing employers to require tipped workers, such as waiters or bartenders, to share their tips with non-tipped workers, such as cooks and dishwashers. Now, my first reaction to reading this was, hey, worker solidarity. Look, everybody's spreading the pool around. My second reaction was, I used to tip dishwashers out. I didn't know it was a thing that people didn't tip them out. You know how it is. You got like a fucking 20 top. It's like a kid's birthday. You got fucking plates coming out all day. You literally generate like 150 plates and all sorts of flatware and cups. And, you get a big ass tip from doing that party. You usually turn around and, you throw the dishwasher a 10 or a 20 because he just busted ass and had to do like 3 extra racks of dishes in a 20-minute span so that everybody had dishes for the massive number of plates that are constantly cranked out of a kitchen on a busy Friday or Saturday night in most restaurants in America. The rule also removed a previous requirement around how much time tipped workers could be required to spend on non-tipped work. Again, speaking to the people who have never actually worked in restaurants and don't have a clue, there's this thing called side work. Basically, some of your hours that you work as a tipped employee are spent doing labor during hours when you're not actually getting tipped. If you're a waiter or a waitress, you probably have to fill up salt and pepper shakers and packets of sugar, and you have to marry ketchup bottles and fold silverware, and if you're a bartender you have to polish and stack glasses. There's a certain amount of side work that servers do before any customers come in that they serve, who then pay them tips. So there's a certain amount of your labor as a server where you are working for $2.13 an hour, even though you're not also getting tips. Previously, the government limited the amount of time a tipped worker could spend on non-tipped activities to 20% of their shift. Doing away with that limit allows employers to underpay workers drastically. Holy crap. There's now no limit to that. So now I can just start hiring people to be waiters and waitresses, and then only give them like one shift a week on the floor where they make tips, and the rest of their time I can have them sweeping floors and carrying heavy boxes and now only have to pay them $2.13 an hour. This seems totally fine and not at all something like, I don't know, greedy capitalists would totally take advantage of to pay people even less, to devalue their labor more, to extract more wealth from them. For instance, instead of having 3 dishwashers on staff, a restaurant could decide to hire 1 dishwasher and require all the waiters to periodically wash dishes as part of their shift. This would represent a large savings for the restaurant, which is required to pay dishwashers a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, but can pay tip servers as little as $2.13. Over the course of a year, tipped workers would lose more than $700 million under this new rule. That number has likely increased since the coronavirus pandemic. With indoor dining drastically reduced, many restaurants that have managed to stay open have shifted to mostly non-tipped work, such as preparing carry-out orders. This is the part of the show where, as a member of the working class, I remind you all that if you are getting food either delivered or pre-prepared and going to pick it up, please tip the hell out of the person who is bringing you that food, because they are busting their ass and making literally no money. Now, if you remember, this story actually started off with a report that tipped workers are now going to have to share their tips with non-tipped workers, which is fucking ludicrous, because apparently now they're not even going to get as many shifts where they make tips in the first place. Quote, you don't solve the low wages of lowest paid workers by taking it out of the wages of the second lowest paid workers. You pay them more. Yes, that would be a great idea. But obviously, that's not going to happen because a whole bunch of wealthy capitalists hired some lobbyists. Those lobbyists went to Washington, spread around some money, and now tipped workers will still get paid $2.13 an hour, even if they spend almost none of their time all week doing actual tipped work. Now, obviously, the easy answer is, I don't know, maybe give everybody the minimum wage. You know, everybody who's laboring should at least make the so-called federal minimum wage for labor per hour. I feel like that should be a thing. But no, because labor doesn't have nearly as many lobbyists and not nearly as much money as the capitalists and business owners. And now, just to show you how shitty they are, I'm going to remind you how tipping came to be in the first place. These days, the expectation at U.S. restaurants that diners will tip their servers is a key part of the culinary economy. Tips subsidize a server or bartender's salary at the vast majority of the nearly 650,000 restaurants in the country. But tipping wasn't always part of the U.S. dining landscape, and scholars who have studied its origins point out that its oft-debated role in the modern economy isn't the only thing potentially troubling about tips. In the earliest days of the practice, its spread was linked to the racial oppression of the post-Civil War Reconstruction period. Wealthy Americans in the 1850s and 60s discovered the tradition, which had originated in medieval times as a master-serf custom, wherein a servant would receive extra money for having performed superbly well on vacations in Europe. Wanting to seem aristocratic, these individuals began tipping in the United States upon their return. Ooh, I'm so bougie. Oh, thank you for giving me my food. Here's an extra copper bit. At first, most diners were largely against it, deeming it both inherently condescending and classist. How could poor Americans be expected to pay for their food and add a tip on top? In fact, there was so much anti-tipping traction that in the 1860s, the attitude spread to Europe. That's one reason why there's no tipping expected at most European restaurants today. But in the States, that movement was squashed, and we went in the exact opposite direction. Because of course we did. After the Constitution was amended in the wake of the Civil War, slavery was ended as an institution, but those who were freed from bondage were still limited in their choices. Many who did not end up sharecropping worked in menial positions, such as servers, waiters, bartenders, and railroad porters. These were pretty much the only occupations available to them. For restaurant workers and railroad porters, there was a catch. Many employers would not actually pay these workers, under the condition that guests would offer a small tip instead. Oh, well, my business was already based on not having to pay my labor because they were slaves. So if I start paying them now, oh, well, then my business will go under. Gee, that sounds an awful lot like every single time there's a conversation about raising the minimum wage, the first thing you hear is what will happen to the businesses. It turns out businesses have been saying this since all their workers were slaves. Almost 200 years, nothing has changed. They're still using the same trope. Doesn't that make you feel a lot better about all those anti-minimum wage arguments you keep hearing? That's where they started. And of course, 2/3 of tipped workers that don't mandate the full minimum wage in America are women. Stunned, right? I know you're stunned. I can literally sense your shock through the camera. So there you go. There's your update on how people with a lot of money are going to find a way to give even less money to the people with the least money. My name is James. I'm from the internet, and I'm out. Peace.